Okay, so I thought I'd do another live stream of skred to show off some new features. I have added some macro or event capabilities. I'm not quite sure what to call them. My microphone quality was not awesome last time. I don't know that it's going to be super pro version now because I'm still just using the microphone built into my laptop. But I just thought I'd show this off. So anyway, here we go. I'm going to start skred. And just as a reminder, skred is a 64 voice wavetable playback engine that has some synthesizer characteristics and some drum machine characteristics and everything else that I want to put into a sound engine that I want to control from other programs or type things live at. So I'll be doing a combination of live things for this. And to show the macro or event capabilities, I'll just load some external waveforms that are drum samples into the system to show how it works. So just as a review, typing things into skred is what I'm calling an AND model. That's atoms, numbers, data, and strings, or excuse me, strings. ANDS, and how that manifests itself as atoms are mostly letters and symbols. Numbers are what you would expect. Data are things surrounded by parentheses, and strings are things surrounded by curly brackets. And we'll see three of those things today. So an atom that I can type is V0, which actually I'm not going to say that, V10, which points to voice number 10 in skred. I'm just using 10, kind of evocative of channel 10 being used for percussion on MIDI, although it's just kind of a weak reference. It doesn't have any direct correspondence to MIDI at all. And I want to set the kind of the nominal amplitude of that to this value of 20. 4 is what you would expect for a reasonable quality or loudness level. This doesn't do anything just yet. Then I want to load 4 wave files into some wavetable slots that are empty. You'll see a lot of numbers flying by, and that's just my preferred way of doing things. Skred uses numbers almost for everything. That's corresponding to data that you're putting in. And so I have an atom called /w for loading wave files. There's a file called 2.wave here, but I don't want to type the wave, so I just shorten it to 2. And I want to put it into wavetable slot 300. And then I want to do the same thing for, so that 2 sound is a hi-hat. The 5.wave, I want to put it into slot 301, and that's a bass drum. I want to put a snare drum, which happens to be wave.13 in my file system, and then just put a crash that's coming from 1.wave and put that into slot 303. Okay, so those just load some wave files into the system that can be used. They're not associated with the voice that I set the volume for earlier. The way I can do that is to point to the point to the voice again, which I didn't technically need to because it remembers the last thing I pointed to, but just for completeness, I'll show this here. And then I want to use the wave slot 300 and trigger it with a velocity of 1, which is just 1 times whatever the amplitude value you set for things. So I told you that 3 was a hi-hat. I didn't lie to you. I can play the bass drum, which sounds like that, and the snare drum, that sounds like that, and the crash sounds like that. I told you about the L for the velocity, which gets multiplied by loudness. So if I go back up to the bass drum, which is 301, and make this twice as loud, that's 2, that's 1, that's 0.5, that's 4. I hope that didn't hurt anybody's ears. All right, so now that I've got some samples loaded that are reasonable, and I have them associated with one voice, I can also use those same loaded samples in another voice, and they don't interfere with one another as far as whatever loudness I choose when it's associated with a different voice, or the frequency for that matter doesn't change at all. So I want to set up voice 11 with amplitude of 20 as well, and then where I was typing V10 before, I can put V11, and if I do two at the same time with different frequencies, which I haven't shown you this before. 440 is kind of the nominal volume level for samples when you load them. It doesn't mean it's actually playing at 440 hertz. That's just kind of the center point for the volume. So things lower than 440 will pitch down. Same thing for pitching up. So I want to trigger voice 10 and voice 11 almost at the same time, both using the same wavetable sample, but play voice 11 half the frequency of that. So here we go. And it's hard to tell what's going on there because the frequency gets lower, it's harder to hear, so not sure that was a great demo. But the reason I would want to do something like this is if you have a long sample, like the crash cymbal, for instance. Oops. Helps you put the whole cymbal in there, or the whole wavetable. If I quickly pointed that to, the snare drum, for instance, what happens is the snare drum gets triggered immediately after the crash does, and you hear none of the crash cymbal. So by having using a separate voice for that, they can play at the same time, although you may not have been able to hear the bass drum. Oops, that was certainly not what I wanted to do. I wanted to play the bass drum much higher. And there you can hear it's pitched up as well, so let's set it back to 440. And I don't know if I've interchangeably used snare and bass drum at the same time, so I apologize if I have. Anyway, so that's a kind of a command line view of just the generals of using loaded waveforms as wavetables on skred. Anything that I type here can be sent from another program over a UDP port. And that indeed is what I have done. I've created an independent program. Skred's written in C. I've written an independent program in Go using the Fine, F-Y-N-E, GUI toolkit that will simply send UDP messages to whatever skred happens to be running here. So let's just show you kind of some examples of that. The things that I typed in below, we can type in here. So I'll type V10 W 300 for the hi-hat with L1. I'll just repeat this for a couple of different things that I've shown. So essentially we'll have one button for each sound that I've got loaded up. All right, so this might be what you would expect. This program has two modes where it just does buttons and there's no key presses associated with this. I do have a touch screen, so I can touch this and make that happen. But if I hit this, let's see, keys on, I can use the keys on the keyboard that are in the brackets to trigger the different one of 16 things that are here. So, for example, that's me just hitting the numbers 1 through 4 on the keyboard. And you can put different messages here below to do different things. So that's a kind of an overview of using an external program to send messages to skred. I talked in the beginning about being able to send make macros that have things kind of crammed together in them. And this will show another kind of feature without much conversation, but well, I'll just show you an example here. I can have a time sequence of things happening. So if I wanted to play the hi-hat, the bass drum, and the snare drum, one right after another, a half a second apart, I can use this notation that says, whoops, in no seconds, play V10, W300, L1, and then in a half a second, play V10, W301, L1, and in half a second after that, V10, W302, L1, and I'll just let this play so you get an idea of what's happening. And why did that not do? Because I can't type correctly. So that's kind of laggy. So let's make this a half a second, or excuse me, a quarter of a second instead of a half a second on each part of the steps. So that's a lot of stuff to type if you just want it to do that sequence. So this is where taking a string and putting it into a macro that it can be used later is useful. So if I wrap all of this into curly brackets to tell skred that this is a string that I want to do something with, and I use this magic command called E2 is what that greater than symbol is meant to, and give it a slot inside my macro or event system, which we'll just call it 0. And this is another indentation I'm not going to explain, but this will show that I've defined slot 0 to play that string, or actually to have that string stored. And then if I say E exclamation point and then the slot number that I've used, it will play that sequence every time I enter that number. Now I show there being E bang 0. That number can be between 0 and 127. So there's 127 macros that are possible here, just using the same notation that I've got. So if we go back up to this skate pad and put in E bang 1, enter. So every time I send the E bang 0 to skred over UDP, it plays that sequence. So here's just, the way the event system works. These things queue up. There's a way to clear to tag things that go into the event queue and remove them before you do it if you don't want to have a messy thing, or have a little bit more control over what gets canceled when you hit the button. But for now, this is just a simple example. Now I'm building up to something that I hope I can describe. I haven't planned this out particularly well, but it's not a mistake that I'm using the numbers 0 through 127 for the macros that are in place. Now, while skred does not directly support MIDI in any form at all, I have created another Go program, which it's called MIDI-skate, which is a MIDI to skred bridge program. And by default, it tries to do something sensible where it looks at the MIDI. So just for example, if I hit a note on, it will send to skred a V with this $C replaced with the channel that a message came in on. It sends N, which is a shortcut for setting frequency by MIDI note number, to the note number of the key that's pressed, and then it does an L for velocity that takes the key note on velocity, divides it by 127 to give a floating point value, and then passes that on to skred. And I won't show that in the context of kind of using a more traditional keyboard frequency-based thing. I'm going to change this pattern that you can do with skred. So instead, it selects a macro number based on the note number. So the way I would do that is to get rid of all this stuff, because I don't care about the velocity right now, and I don't actually care about which voice it's playing for directly. What I want is to send the E bang with a note number that follows this. and I don't want anything to happen when a node off is sent, so I will bypass that. So this is the setup for what happens when this program receives MIDI events, and it then sends the mutated values to skred over a UDP port. So nothing's going to happen yet with this, but I have this virtual MIDI piano keyboard app, which is something that someone else wrote, that is connected to RT MIDI input client is on Linux what this MIDI bridge shows up to. That really needs to have a more sensible name, something like MIDI skate #1 or something like that. But in any event, when I press keys on this GUI, they'll show up in this GUI just kind of as a diagnostic for what's really happening. So if I hit F3, you'll see in this pane it's showing the MIDI values that came through from this program, and then this shows what it's been transferred to, or what it's been transformed into before it's sent to skred. So what happens if I hit C3, which is the third octave C key, you can see how it's sending E48. And there's no E48 defined here right now, so it doesn't have anything to do. But if I say, if I define a macro saying V10 W3000 for the symbol L1, and put that into slot 48, did I say? Now when I hit C3, what happens? It plays the symbol. Now I know this is an on-screen MIDI program. I did that for two reasons. Why, I have no physical MIDI keyboard here in my apartment, and it would be hard without having a camera set up to show you what's happening here. But let's just kind of repeat this for for key 50. I'm just looking down here to see what it's playing for. So if I define this for 50 and then play the bass drum when that key is pressed, so C is symbol, so you could have a little drum kit on your keyboard. And then, because this is fancy, if you remember this pattern, I can tell it to play E0 when it gets, what would be the next key after D? That's 52. So when I hit E3, it plays that sequence of events. Okay, so there's a whole bunch more to show on this, like patterns can be repeated, these macros can be repeated, sequences of skred things can be repeated. I showed that in another live video. I don't know if you watched that, I can demo it later. But all of the same things can be used here, where you could have a macro being repeated a number of times when you hit a key, or things of that nature. And also, there would be certainly a way of using variables, which skred supports variables internally, where you could have some range of keys on the MIDI keyboard change a variable that contains a volume level that's then used by something that you trigger here. So you could have one key setting a volume level, or one hand pressing keys that were changing volume levels or frequencies or something else, and another set of keys that were actually triggering the drum sample with those values set. So lots of possibilities. If anybody wants to comment on this and ask for certain things that I might have alluded to that you're interested in, I'd like to hear it. So anyway, that's all I've got for now. I hope this makes sense. I hope that you can hear what I'm saying and see what I'm doing, and that I can get some interest in this. A little bit of credits are due. I was inspired to do all of this from the Amy project, which I'll mention I'll put in the descriptions below how you can find the Amy project. It's a fancier version of a sound engine than what I've done, but their way of specifying how to set up a synthesizer voice by these ASCII strings. They call it the Amy Wire protocol. And I have mutated that into my own version that only has about 1% of compatibility with what the Amy people are doing now. So I called mine skode, skode. Skred uses the skode protocol. And I'll put a link to my GitHub page where that's kind of described in some level of detail. But anyway, that's all I got for now. Hope you enjoy this.